Hello everyone and welcome again to Randomised Gaming, and I will be your host as always for this video, Random Gamer Riven. And this is actually a really special video as this is a massive compatibility test that we've given to our open source scan converter, or OSSC for short. So I've basically taken my NTSC US SNES and we've gone and chucked a huge ton of games at it to see how it handles them. Now, traditionally, I do tend to speak a bit too long in these opening introductions. So this time, as you can see here, we've already cut to Axelay, which is one of the earlier shooting games from Konami on Super Nintendo. It was a really technically impressive one, which is one of the reasons I wanted to show it to you quickly. Axelay has actually been shown in a few other open source scan converter videos, but it's one of those ones that I thought I'd show. However, I've actually been very careful not to show a lot of other games that you normally see, because traditionally you'll watch one of these videos and you'll see Super Mario World, you'll see Contra or Probotector in Europe, you'll see games like Castlevania, although we do include the second Castlevania in R1 for the fire effect, and other games that include Mario Kart and Pilot Wings. Now, I'm sick to death of watching a handful of scalar videos that just have a handful of the really common games, and I wanted to show you a more in-depth look at a huge variety of games. This is on our US SNES system, so we're going to be showing you US released cartridges and Japanese released cartridges. We are going to show some PAL games, but they will be done in a separate video. So Axelay here really is a technically impressive game, which is why I wanted to show it to you. So our next title is Pop and Twinbee, which is a really bright, bold and colourful game. And I really want to show how the colours in this one work with the OSSC, because you can see there are lots of bright, bold, fast-moving colours as well. Not that technically impressive, but it really is a very nice game. There are actually two Pop and Twinbee games on the Super Nintendo. There's also Rainbow Bell Adventure, which was a platformer, which I didn't want to show, although Rainbow Bell Adventure has an interesting history. It wasn't released in America, and the Japanese version, when it was released in Europe, was cut to pieces, all sorts of changes, and really ruined. So the Japanese version of Rainbow Bell Adventure is fantastic. The European release isn't so good. One other thing I should say is that this is taken from my, as I said, North American system. My North American system is actually a 2-chip Super Nintendo, not a 1-chip Super Nintendo. The 2-chip traditionally doesn't have quite as good RGB Scart quality picture as the 1-chip. But there is a bit of a caveat with that, because the 2-chip is the only one to play all games correctly. The 1-chip is notoriously flawed, hence why it was actually only available in a handful of Super Nintendo units and the discounted Super Famicom Junior before that Nintendo actually went back to the 2-chip system. So on to the third game, which is R-Type 3, an absolutely stunning game. This would be one game I really would like to test with a 1-chip Super Nintendo, because as I mentioned, the problem with the 1-chip was it was basically discontinued pretty swiftly, except for the discount Super Famicom Junior, because it doesn't display a lot of games correctly. There are graphical glitches added into games like Yoshi's Island. There's a notorious sound bug with Super Turrican. Basically, there are a lot of games that do have problems with the 1-chip SNES, hence why it was taken out of circulation. There are a lot of videos saying how wonderful it is, and yes, it does give a much better picture, but you do have to be aware of that caveat, and a lot of people fail to really mention that caveat, that the 1-chip was discontinued for a reason quite swiftly. It was designed as a cost-cutting exercise, and it did improve RGB. So as you can see, R-Type 3 here has a huge amount of scaling, scrolling, some really fast-paced action, and some almost pseudo 3D effects coming up next. It's actually a really great game to test with the open source scan converter. It really puts it through its paces. And this was the one game I really hope the footage exports correctly, because I tried to export this video last week but had a number of issues and sadly had to adjust some things to get it hopefully to export correctly this time around. But you see there, this background rolling just looks stunning and all the scaling. It really is an impressive Super Nintendo game. And ultimately, I'll let your eyes be the judge as to whether you think the open source scan converter is doing a good job of it. Okay, next up, a quick look at one Super FX game. I've only gone for one Super FX game because there's an awful lot of videos that contain Star Fox, but I thought I'd show you a quick bit of Stunt Race FX. This is the Japanese version, which is Wild Trax, and this was published and developed by Nintendo. And I must admit, it's interesting. You will notice the RGB picture quality does change slightly depending on the games. Clearly some developers did manage to improve the picture quality slightly on the 2-chip SNES compared to, so certainly the later games do look slightly better than the earlier games, which is an interesting fact, and I haven't seen too many people mention that. I've seen a lot of people say the 1-chip is infinitely better, and it does give you a clearer picture, but as I mentioned, there are some compatibility issues that mean that you really need both a 2-chip and a 1-chip SNES. So that was Wild Trax, from one racing game that's in 3D to a 2D Mode 7 game. This is Astro Go, one of the more obscure Japanese releases, but a brilliantly fun racer once you get used to the controls. It's incredibly fast paced, as you'll see here, and we've also done a video on the channel if you want to watch a full long play of one of the cups. This is a SNES game that, for my money, doesn't actually quite get enough love. It is actually a really, really well put together game, developed by K's, who are better known for some of their pinball titles. But that might explain why the pinball physics in this, when you hit the other cars, go a bit crazy. It does feel like you are a pinball type, but yeah, really good game to actually test because it is so fast paced, so it really gives the scaler a run for its money. And as you can see here, very, very impressive results. Our old scaler, I suspect, would have turned this into a sheet of grease, as there were one or two games I couldn't really capture with our older scaler. And on to another racing game. This is Top Gear 2, which was developed by Gremlin Graphics. It was published by a couple of publishers. This is the US version, so it was published by Kemco in the US. And this is another tour de force in terms of technical achievement. This really is an impressive game with the sort of pseudo 2D, 3D. I thought this was actually a DSP game. It isn't, it's just a standard game, but Gremlin Graphics, or Interactive as they were, really did do some really great tricks to get some wonderful visual effects in this. There's actually 3 Top Gear games, and the third one actually specifically used a version of the DPS for some really great scaling. The first one also uses some really good effects too, but I think this second game is probably slightly better looking than the first one, hence why I didn't video it. Sadly, we don't have a copy of the third one, so I can't video that one at present. Okay, on to a late... In fact, going from this forward onwards, you're going to see a lot of late NLice SNES games that really push the system, and I do mean that. We've got a lot of chips coming in the later ones, the sort of later systems, and these games really do show off what the developers got to grips with once they've been working on the systems for a number of years and the cartridges had expanded. So this is Kirby Dream Land 3. This is the Japanese version. It was done by HAL Laboratories, and I believe it was published by Nintendo. Of course, it's Kirby. We all know what Kirby is, but for a technical point of view, this is a incredibly impressive game. Slight spoilers, I do show the final boss at the end because there's some great scaling and sort of fast-moving effects when you see the final boss and sort of mock transparencies. But yep, this is the fairly colourful intro to start with, and you see nice, clean, sharp pixels. And this game actually does, as I mentioned earlier, this one, because it's a 97 title, looks a lot sharper than some of the earlier Super Nintendo games. And there's a very distinct visual style. Now, this is one game I tried to capture at one point with our older scaler and the Elgato. Even I think previously Elgato, the quality was not there. It's sort of... the effects just lost a lot of the visual thing because the old scaler did a lot of interlacing, which was great for interlacing games unlike the PS2, which is something the open source scan converter struggles with. And I'm going to show that actually interestingly with resolution changes on the Super Nintendo in the PAL video, because we'll do a follow-up PAL video which covers PAL games to see how it handles PAL resolutions. This video now is just purely NTSC games. But I'm aware of one game with a resolution change, and that is Power Drive Rally, which we actually videoed previously, but that has a resolution change, and it was interesting to see how the open source scan converter handled it with the Super Nintendo. And it's not ideal, there is a slight delay. With having Bob on, it was quicker to change, but doesn't look quite as nice. Having it off means it looks better, but takes longer to transition between the different resolutions. Okay, just a quick snippet from Dracula XX or Castlevania XX or Vampire Kiss, depending where you are in the world. This is the Japanese version, and I'm basically showing you the nice transparent intro with the effects, and I'm going to show you a few scenes from stage 1 with the flaming effect in the background just to see how that is handled by the open source scan converter. Because rapid moving and scaling effects on some scalers don't look as nice as they should. And I must admit, this is one game I think gets a lot more flack than it deserves. I think it's a nice port. It's just basically a re-envisioning of Rond of Blood. I have to admit, I think Rond of Blood is slightly overrated. Playing as Richter in Rond of Blood is not actually that much fun, as they've ramped up the difficulty so much. And while the second half of the game isn't that visually impressive, a bit like R-Type 3 we showed earlier, the first stage is like really visually impressive and the later stages are all rather bland in comparison. This is very much the same. The first stage uses some really nice visual effects, so I just wanted to show it to you. Okay, from one slightly creepy game to another. This is Demon's Crest, or Demon's Blazon as my Japanese copy is called, or better known to you, me and everyone else as Gargoyle's Quest 3. And if you stay tuned to the end of the video, we will be looking at the second game on the Super Game Boy. So you can see there, one of the reasons I kept the opening intro is because there's a great demon flame effect that you see at the start with how the graphics are. Got some nice transparencies as well, and it's interesting to see how the open source scan converter, because rapid movement with our old scaler could occasionally result in lots of almost like grease on the screen, which is why there were one or two games I did try to avoid videoing. This one has some really impressive opening sprites. Again, it's quite a late Super Nintendo game, so you've got some massive opening boss fight here at the very start of the game. Admittedly, it's a very easy fight, but it looks very visually impressive. And of course it's a spin-off of the Ghosts and Goblins series. Okay, next up, a very late Capcom game, and one that is still missing from numerous Mega Man Anniversary collections on PS4, etc. This is Rockman and Fort, or better known to us in the West as Mega Man and Bass. This is really one of the best Super Nintendo games. It's based on the Mega Man 8 engine, and it really does look fantastic. Great Mega Man game. This really showed what the Super Nintendo could do, and Mega Man when he was pushed to the very best of games design. And this actually came out after Mega Man 8 on PS1. It was a really visually stunning thing. Ironically, this actually, I think the reason they did this was because Mega Man 8 didn't sell particularly well on PS1, so they went back to the Super Nintendo, hoping it would sell better. I don't know how well this sold, but it was certainly a great swan song for Mega Man on Super Nintendo. And it's just a shame we never had a SNES port released in the West. Okay, on to, in fact, a very quick look at Ganbare Geoman 4. This is the fourth game, so it's by far the visually most impressive. I don't think it's the best of the three. I actually prefer the second and third ones of the Ganbare Geoman series. This fourth one looked a little bit rushed. It's not that long actually, but there's some great sections here. I'm just going to briefly show you some small fast-paced sections here, and then a bit of underwater in one of the bosses. This was Konami at their very, very best. Oh, and one thing I should point out while I'm here, all of these videos were captured at Line X2 mode, which I believe gives me a 480p 720 resolution. I could not get the Super Nintendo to capture any other resolution, although I was able to get Line 3X to work on my television. Elgato did not like Line 3X, sadly, on Super Nintendo. Okay, now a quick glimpse at the scrolling beat-em-up Maximum Carnage from Software Creation, or developed by Software Creation, published by Akane and LJN. And if you ever read the comic books, I have to credit the Pickford brothers who worked on this. This is a fantastic adaptation, and I actually have the Maximum Carnage comic books, and they have literally taken the art from the comic books and converted it beautifully into these gaming cutscenes, which really were fantastic when they did them. It's a shame the sequel didn't have them, but and there's some minor changes to the dialogue and some slight censorships here in the SNES version, but it's absolutely fantastic. And it is a brilliant scrolling beat 'em up, and probably one of the best Marvel games they've ever made. Certainly one of the best Spider-Man games. Just a quick bit of footage from the opening level. I didn't go that far into Maximum Carnage, so you won't get to see a lot of the sort of different types of gameplay. There is the climbing sections and all the various bosses. I just thought I'd do a quick bit. Okay, next up is Super Donkey Kong Country 2, which of course, well, Super Donkey Kong 2 or Donkey Kong Country 2 to give their correct titles. As you can tell from the name that was just shown, this is actually the Japanese version. And again, this is a very visually impressive Super Nintendo game. I slightly prefer this one to the third one, hence why I decided to showcase this one and not the third one. But there is some great visual effects, like you'll see with the boss coming up with this wind blowing in the background on the first boss. There's some really great, and credit to Rare. I mean, I spent an awful lot of my time when I was younger playing them. They really were fantastic, the Donkey Kong Country games. And I have to admit, I actually preferred them to Yoshi's Island. Okay, now, I am a huge roleplay game fan.